the age of 9, and Fitzgerald was like Mount Everest. A lot of people complain that it sucks all the air out of the room, and there's so many other compelling Great Lakes stories. Fitzgerald, well, everyone is interested in this Fitzgerald, and that's true. It's true for a reason, because it is an incredibly complex, tragic, mysterious, once in a century type story. And even if you fancy yourself sort of a shipwreck nut, it exerts a pull, a magnetic pull that you can't get away from. So I thought, well, if I'm going to take a shot at a story that's been something like 28 or almost 30 books now. 30 books have been written since 1976 about the story. What could I possibly bring to the tale? The last time it was explored by submarine or any way was in 1995. Nothing has happened since then. What could possibly be that original? So, given my background, I thought, well, boat was alive and very vibrant and the biggest ship on the lakes and a real fan favorite, boat nerd favorite for 17 good years. Why not talk about the boat in its life? As much as you can't avoid talking about the end, but why not talk about the boat in life and bring that to life in photos, historic photos, and paintings and ephemera, and providentially working with the Shipwreck Historical Society. After the bell was brought up in 95, because of its profile, the museum's profile, tremendous amount of wonderful historical material had been trickling in for 30 years. People would just say, well, my uncle passed and he had all this Fitzgerald stuff and you should have it. And I started digging around one night working on an entirely different project, and I was just amazed. I was just floored at the material. And I could see, having already built a book or two, how this could be translated into a really compelling visual story. Not so much a read, although my co-author retells the historic side of the way this book functions is really just as a picture book. It's wonderful stuff that picture, truly, as cliched as it sounds, really is worth 1,000 words. Here we have the keel lay, or keel has been laid, but the first 24 bottom plate, Great Lakes Engineering Works, 1957. This is a painting commissioned by the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company. Are most of us familiar with the story of the Fitzgerald? I mean, if someone's not, I can give you a rehash of the basic events, but the boat was commissioned and owned by the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company of Milwaukee, but then it was chartered to the Oak Bay Norton Company of Cleveland. They actually operated the vessel. Northwestern Mutual was run, or CEO, president was Edmund Fitzgerald, the vessel's namesake. His family were 3-generation Lakefarers. He was the only member of the family that wasn't directly in the Great Lakes shipping industry, and as a consequence, he was a little leery of having the vessel named after him. And then the story goes, and I know this from a first-hand source, that the board, he was retiring, and the board waited until he went to the restroom, voted then to name the vessel after him. He was pretty frustrated with that, and then he finally kind of warmed up, and he really warmed up to it eventually. And according to his son, after the vessel sank, it haunted him till the end of his days. He just would not talk about it, and he had a cloud over him ever after. It was the worst. His son said the day she was launched was the best day of his life. The day she sank was the worst day of his life, and he never really got over it. They were also big patrons of the arts, so they had a fairly famous painter from Milwaukee do 3 paintings of the vessel while it was being constructed, including this lovely piece here. Oops, now going on. Here's again some construction photos of the Great Lakes Engineering Works. The Fitz and her sort of sister ship were the last 2 vessels built in that yard before they went out of business. That's always factored into some of the conspiracy or the because of the mystery. One of the theories would be that the vessel, the shipyards were kind of teetering financially, and as a consequence, some of the workmanship wasn't the best. I started buying into that myself. Here's launching day, 1858, largest ship on the Great Lakes, 7,500 tons. They still side launched them in that day, which is an extraordinary thing. I've only seen one side launch, and and that was a tiny little Coast Guard cutter. This is a 730 foot, 729 foot warboat, and it was a heck of a spectacle. And again, in the folklore, the mythology, they hadn't side launched a hull this big at Great Lakes Engineering Works, and so she kind of got away from them, and it went all the way over to as you can see in the photo there, to the far seawall, and it threw up a huge amount of water, and they had spectator bleachers set up on the far side of the slip, which knocked the wave knocked over, and a gentleman on the bleachers had a heart attack and died. A fellow from Toledo. And of course, sailors being a very superstitious lot, that's a bad juju. And of course, it took them, these things are hindsight. Oh, sure, obviously, it was fated, but Mrs. Fitzgerald, the vessels are always christened by the wife, usually. Great Lakes ships tend to be named after men, usually in the managers of the steel company or the owners of the vessel, and they're usually christened by the wives of the gentleman for whom the ship is named. Mrs. Fitzgerald christened the Fitzgerald, and it took 3 shots with a champagne bottle to break the bottle, which is also considered to be bad luck. Yeah. So start on a bad note, and then poor guy, keels over in the spectator stand. What do you expect? Here's a shot of the vessel being fit out later in 1958 in the floating dry dock. Here she is getting ready to go on her sea trial. Steam up, she's coal-fired initially, and built to, one of the first vessels built to the full, what they called Seaway Max. First vessel built to fill out the new Seaway locks. She came out in 1958. Of course, the Seaway opened in 59, so she was ahead of her time just a little bit. Another shot in the bad luck department. The vessel wasn't more than 8 or 9 months old when the calamitous 1959 steel strike came down the pike, and an industry-wide strike, and all of the ore boats, the whole Great Lakes fleet, had no work for like 116 days, most of the season, or half the season, or the season. And so, being a brand new ship and being something of a title holder, largest vessel on the lakes, Northwestern Mutual decided, well, we'll bring her to her home port, and we'll open the vessel for tours, for public tours, which they did in the summer of 1999. And you can see Mr. Edmund and Mrs. Edmund Fitzgerald. This is a classic shot of him strolling up the deck. Something like 30,000 toured the vessel over the course of 2 days. And the vessel was never in her home port again. She was only in Milwaukee one time. It has a beautiful black and white shot of the boat, brand new. It's the Captain Larson, the first captain of the vessel, coming down the deck, probably going to lunch. Friend there. This image is what really convinced me that there's a way to tell the story visually. It hasn't been done. But this is Captain McSorley's original Merchant Mariner's called a Z-card photograph from 1838. And there's something haunting about that photo, and it just got under my skin. And these sorts of things came in when the bell was raised. Tom Farnquist, who was the president of the society, executive director at the time, just wrote to everyone, and in this case to the Coast Guard, and said, "Do you have any photos of any of the crewmen trying to put faces?" The stories are sort of impersonal until you see the face of whoever it is. This is some of the faces to the tail, and this is one of the images that came from the Coast Guard. So you see Captain McSorley as a young. And here he is much later in his career. He took over command of the Fitz. He had been a captain for Old Bay since 1951. He got his first command. He was a 44-year veteran sailor. And so here he is getting, when they gave him the Fitzgerald in 1971, 72, they gave him his 20-year clock. He had been a captain for Old Bay for 20 years. A nice Chelsea clock. Thank you. The boat, as I mentioned, was the corporate yacht. So a lot of important people, either clients of Northwestern Mutual or clients of Ogle Bay, would go on a delightful 7-day or 6-day Great Lakes round trip cruise. And it's important to remember that in the late 50s, nobody had air conditioning. Nobody just jetted off to Jamaica or something on vacation. So to be invited to go on an all-expense paid trip out of Cleveland or some hot place, Detroit or Chicago, or to go on a nice cruise up to the head of lakes, up to North Shore, and take tours of the waterfalls and see the locks. That was a big deal. It was a way swanky thing to. And of course, the alcohol was all you could drink, and food was all you can eat. And the lake boats are known for, well, it's not fancy food, but it's very good food. And so this was a big thing to be invited along. There she is, boats in the rock cut here. I suspect there was some drink involved. Photo, they're out dancing. They're the like a lot of lake freighters of that era. She had a full suite of guest accommodations at the forward end, and then she had a dining room aft, adjacent to the galley, where the guests dine, and these folks had probably had dinner, and now they're out having some after supper cocktails, taking in there in the rock cut area of St. Mary's River downbound here. This is sort of also an interesting, timely photo. If you've been up to the Sioux lately, you can see them digging the new lock. Well, here they are digging the pole lock in 1969, and the Fitzgerald is downbound there in Arthur Lock. Now, what's really great or interesting about this photo is it was taken by the woman who was secretary of the area engineer of the Sioux Locks. She was an amateur photographer, and she had a real wonderful perspective on traffic at Sioux Locks at a really interesting time when the locks were very, very busy. And so she took this shot, for instance, and her car, for some reason, I've never heard why, she had several boxes of her slides, like this one, in the back seat of her vehicle, which was stolen, with the slides in the vehicle. And the thieves sort of went through the car after they ditched it, and they threw a bunch of stuff out. I don't know if they ever found the car, but the crooks had ditched all the stuff in the car looking for money or whatever they're looking for, and they threw the slides in on Highway 2 up in the UP there. They threw them in bushes, and someone from MDOT who happened to know Dorothy found the next spring they found these boxes after the snow melted. Cause a shipwreck here. And the fellow found the boxes, happened to know Dorothy, and so he salvaged these pictures out of the snowbank. And there, not just this shot, but there's dozens of others that would have been lost to history, if not for that little piece of luck. Here's the vessel's observation lounge. And this was in 1963. Here she is. And again, if you look at a modern cruise ship, Fitzgerald's a little homely, or whatever, but you have to kind of take yourself back to the 50s, and this sort of decor was considered very modern. They had a television. Not everyone had TV, and so this was considered very swank. All of the interior furnishings were purchased from the big department store in Detroit. The name escapes me, but so they had Hudson's, it's all top shelf furniture and bedding, and curtains, and everything. This is now, I am the world's biggest fan of the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, song for which the boat became famous. But the only thing, one of the very few things he didn't get right, and I suspect it's because nothing rhymes with Zug Island, but the Fitzgerald was not, in fact, headed to Cleveland. She was, although Mobile Bay Norton was headquartered in Cleveland. She was actually headed to the National Steelworks at Zaga Island, which is just south of Detroit. And you see in this photo the vessel passing Zaga Island. This was about 1971. And it's interesting here, 50 years on, one of the things that has changed since 2015, when the first edition of the book came out, is this steel mill now is defunct. So many things have faded into history. This steel mill is now gone cold. So even the mill that the boat was bringing the ore to has passed history. This is probably the most famous shot of the boat taken in the St. Mary's River, 1974. This is one of our Sturgeon Bay. The two of the crew were from Sturgeon Bay. This is Buck Champeau. This is not. This photo was not taken on the Fitzgerald. This was one of his tours on an older vessel, probably one of the old big boats. They had older boats in their fleet. That's a reciprocating steam engine. It's not the Fitzgerald, which had a modern turbine engine. He was from Sturgeon Bay. Some of his folks are here. Yes. This is his guy. Yeah, I met you once 10 years ago at Whitefish. And then the second assistant, Russell Haskell, second assistant, was also from Sturgeon Bay. So that is the local connections. Sturgeon Bay is the home of. It's been the home of so many mariners over the years. That shot opposite is just a great, again, a little guest, some young girl. Yes, this was about 1970. That photo was taken wearing either Captain Pulser or Captain Sorley's hat to let her steer the boat. And this, no one knew it at the time, was the last photo ever taken of the Fitzgerald on October 26th. At least as far as we know, maybe there's others, but the only, this is the one we can establish, is the last known photo, October 26, 1975, at Zug Island, unloading. She had one more round trip after this. She took ore to her last port of unload was Ashtabula, Ohio. I think she finished unloading there on the 5th. She went back up for the last trip. It's a painting that was commissioned by the Shipwreck Society called Every Man Knew, which of course is a line from the song. My own book, the title is The Legend Lives On, an homage to the song. It's all about the song. Oh, careful, you'll unplug me. These people would probably be really. What? No, it's very hard to get your head wrapped around what conditions that night on November 10th. Periodically, at least at the height of the storm, they were battling waves as high as 40 feet. It's hard to fathom that because normally you're not out on deck taking pictures of such a thing. And of course, in the case of the Fitz, it was dark. So this is the only photo I've ever seen, a reasonably modern photo that shows the power of Great Lakes waves. This is the taken aboard the Sparrow's Point, which was a Bethlehem steel boat, about the same size as the Fitzgerald. This is on northern Lake Michigan, and that's a 25-foot coming over the stern. So imagine a wave twice as big coming all the way over the what's called the poop deck. You can see the lifeboat davits there. Both the Anderson and presumably the Fitzgerald. The Anderson we know because Anderson came through. Waves tall enough to go over the lifeboats and break all of the strong backs in the lifeboats. Were hitting both boats and they're at the height of the storm. So this gives you a sense of what a wave half the size looks like, and you can see how much what's called green water, is on deck. Surface water, green water that's coming out of the lake that can create all sorts of havoc. Ship. So of course, I believe, never mind its own. I believe this was the first time, don't quote me, but I believe this was the first time they ever closed the Mackinac Bridge. They close it all the time now, but this was the Fitzgerald storm, and after this truck blew over on the approach, they closed the bridge, and they registered peak gusts of 90 miles an hour in the straits. and no one's entirely sure how heavy the wind was blowing on Lake Superior, but in that range. And then you had the collision of, you can talk about meteorology of that storm for all night if I wanted to, and how three systems sort of fueled what amounted to very violent and fairly brief little micro hurricane. And I was talking to some folks earlier. If you're trying to create you're a safety consultant and you're trying to create a safety culture, say in the shipping industry, there's a thing called the Swiss cheese model. And ideally, you have all sorts of safety systems that overlap. And as a consequence, bad things might get through one layer of the Swiss cheese, but then it'll run into solid Swiss cheese behind the hole. But every once in a while, all of the Swiss cheese holes line up. And November 10th, 1975 was one of those times where if one or two things had been different, it's entirely possible that that trip would have been a little disturbing, maybe a little frightening, and certainly much worse than they thought they were signing up for. The storm was much worse than it had been predicted to become, but they would have come through fine. And Great Lakes ships are built to take bad weather. So this event was not. Oh, now you did it. What did you do? She helps me with comic relief. You're going to get thrown out of here. Yes. So headline news on the 11th was, I mean, no one believed it. No one wanted to believe it, that such a thing could happen. I think in the industry, all of your senior officers didn't think you could sink a vessel as big as Fitzgerald in the Great Lakes. Waves are a function of wind duration and fetch, how much water there is. And even on Lake Superior, which is by surface area the largest freshwater lake in the world, you can only make about a 40-foot wave. And so they figured with the amount of freeboard these vessels had and their size and their horsepower that there was no way, unlike, say, the Great Storm of 1913, where you had vessels that were almost as big as the Fitzgerald, but they had like 2,000 horsepower engines, and they would get blown around in the wind, and then they would capsize or something. Fitzgerald had a 9,000 or 7,500 horsepower engine. It had 17 or 18 foot of freeboard, and it just didn't think you could sink a ship like that. And so this, of course, changed everyone's mind. And I would say, based on what I've observed, it changed the culture drastically. That people are not as excited about, well, we'll just stick our nose out and see what happens. This proved that you can, in fact, sink a large carrier in Lake Superior. It's a painting by a friend of mine. One of the great parts of the story, of course, the vessel disappears. The Anderson through the storm that night. Arthur and Anderson, you'll see in the shipyard time to time. The captain of the Anderson is basically the Coast Guard. When they finally accept the idea that Fitzgerald might have sunk, they have no assets anywhere near the area where they believe the Fitz has gone down. So they go on the open air, pleading with any other commercial traffic in the area to turn around or slow down or basically make their way to the area where the Fitz was last seen and try to effect some sort of rescue. So most of the vessels, including the three saltwater ships, of course, everyone, there's always this great freshwater versus saltwater battle. Our storms are bigger than your storm. The three saltwater boats refused to turn around. They were like, no way are we going back in there. And a couple of other boats got underway, but they didn't have enough horsepower to make any time into those conditions. And only the William Clay Ford, who you see in the front there, and the Anderson turned around, went right back into that ship-killing weather. And the Ford was anchored in Whitefish Bay, safely anchored. He brought up his anchor, and they went out and searched, and of course they found virtually nothing. An oil slick, the lifeboats, some garbage, furniture, life rings, and really nothing else. And Captain Cooper, master of the Anderson, they asked him, why would you do such a thing? His answer was as ancient as seafaring itself. If it was us, we would have wanted them to do the same thing. If my son was on that boat or whatever, I would have wanted someone to turn around, and they were the only people in any position to render any sort of aid. I would have wanted someone to make at least an effort to come find us. This is a great haunting photo. This is a boat called the Henry Steinbrenner. Now, this was about a week after the lost cruise going over the last known. At that point, they hadn't found the wreck, but this was sort of the general vicinity where the boat was lost. And so these guys are observing the loss of their fellow mariners and throwing cases of flowers into the water over the wreck. There's one of those bits of flotsam there, that oil-covered life ring. And then this is the Newsweek article that Gordon Lightfoot got on a plane in LA and flew to Toronto and picked up this magazine, not this actual magazine, but this issue of the magazine on the airplane, and apparently thought to himself, well, this story, he was a very avid, as he said, a very avid Great Lakes sailor. These guys deserve more than a few column inches in this magazine to write a song, which he did, and then he refused to do anything with it because he was perfecting it. And then they were just at the end of recording Summertime Dream, which is the album the song is on, and he said, that's it, we're done. And the sound engineer eventually said, look, Gord, you're going to pay for the studio, you have it at the end of the day or whatever it was. Why don't you try the Shipwreck song? And so the story goes, they got the band in there and they played it from start to finish. Evidently, drummer didn't know when he was supposed to come in, that great drum riff. The song is based on an Irish funeral song, a dirge. And he played it through, and the guy came in right at the right minute with the drums and the slide guitar. And evidently they did a few more takes the next day, but the take that is on the album is the first take. It was done on the first take without any tweaks. And for a guy whose catalog spans close to 60 years, he considers it by his own reckoning his finest song. He's got some pretty terrific songs. So I really don't think Fessel would have the profile that it does in the popular culture without that song, because every year it comes around and it's so haunting. It just puts a new hook in generation, and it will be with us well down into the age of social or satellite radio. This is Reverend Richard Ingalls, who was the man who rang the bell 29 times. I did not know it. I took the photo right there, and he passed away about 2 weeks after I took. That was the Blessing of the Fleet, 2006. Passed away about 2 weeks later. Oops, man, this thing is Jacques Cousteau was the first, other than the Coast Guard, the Navy, who surveyed the vessel underwater when they found it in 1976. Cousteau was the first private individual, not governmental individual, to take his Sucoup, the diving submersible there on the Calypso. They went down. They made, I think, 2 dives on the Fitz, and as will be the case for time immemorial, they did not come back with any answers. There's no answers to be had, in my opinion, at least. Do you want to go home? Am I that boring? Do you want to go sit by Sissy? So now, there are then, after Cousteau, there are 4 underwater expeditions in relatively close sequence. In 1989, University of Michigan sent what was then a very cutting-edge piece of technology, an ROV, that had sort of like, if you've seen Titanic, it's like a mother ship, a mother ROV, and then a little ROV goes out on a tether. That was in 89. Now, the only real interesting takeaway from that expedition, 2 things. One was that, unlike Coast Guard survey, and they, to be fair, in 1976, they were using some pretty primitive tools. They were convinced that the bell and all of the instrumentation on the pilot house roof were gone. They were blown off in the sinking. So in 89, they discovered that, oh no, the mast and the Columbia Steamship Herald and the bell, everything's right there where it should be. And then the other interesting thing they were able to determine, because of the small size of the ROV, they were able to actually go into one of the pilot house windows, and they were able to determine that the engine room telegraphs, steamship, so that this era still, they communicated, the pilot house communicated engine orders to the engine room via a mechanical device called a telegraph. And the telegraph is rung up at full ahead. So that indicates that the vessel was going full speed, and probably they did not know that they were going to be sunk in 10 seconds. Otherwise, they would have taken power off the engine and made some attempt to abandon ship. And that gets a little bit in terms of storytelling to this image here. This was done in the 94 submersible expedition that was a joint effort by the Shipwreck Society and submersible was clearly, I can't remember the ocean branch, harbor branch. And on this trip, it was discovered that the starboard side pilot house door is open, undogged and open. That it might indicate that they right maybe at the end that someone decided that the vessel was about to plunge and maybe tried to leave the pilot house. So that was about the only thing that all 5 of submersible expeditions were really ever able to prove that. And I guess the other major significant clue is that the number 1 cargo hatch is collapsed into the cargo hold, which would indicate that at the end, what might have doomed the vessel right at the very end is the collapse of that cargo hatch. Static loading of the Anderson reported this. One of the theories is the Three Sisters theory. Giant 40-foot waves that broke the lifeboats. The Anderson was behind the Fitz. They reported being hit by these 3 sisters about 7 o'clock. 10 minutes later, they caught up to the Fitzgerald. She was already losing buoyancy, and the amount of weight that these 3 waves put on deck was enough to push the nose down, and then because of that forward superstructure, all that water would build up behind the superstructure before the vessel could shed the weight, and that forward, that number 1 cargo hatch collapsed, and that doomed the ship because then tons of water goes rocketing into the cargo hold, and that puts the nose down, dives like a submarine at that point, going 17 miles an hour, and that's borne out by the devastation of the wreck, which hit the bottom, going full speed, presumably, given the damage that is evident on the bow, and the fact that she's down to her summer load line. She went 17 feet into the bottom before it hit bedrock and stopped, basically. So that leads experts to imagine that it submarine, basically, dove into the bottom at full speed, and the forces, both the collision with the bottom and then as the vessel's going down, the uneven loading of flooded ballast tanks and green water are working on that long hull, and it's possible that the vessel began to break up on the surface before she hit the bottom, or when she hit the bottom, that there's about 250 foot of the hull that is just exploded, literally exploded. If you've ever seen 1.5 inch thick steel, it's hard to imagine, but it's broken into what the area they call the area of the wreck the jungle. It's just like a steel jungle of metal that's ripped like physics at work during this event are really hard to fathom. And part of the reason I think to this day why the wreck is so mysterious, other historic wrecks on the Great Lakes are more, you can get your head wrapped around it and understand what was happening. This thing is so catastrophic, it's very difficult to fathom. The chaos, the quantum chaos at work, something that big being swallowed up that quickly. Here's the forward masthead. As you can see, strangely enough, in spite of what I just said, all of the navigation lights are still intact. Globes, the glass globes. This is the Columbia Steamship Herald, what they call the whistle light. The ship would blow its whistles that would light up. So if you were on the river, everybody Columbia boat. The stern section, about 200 foot of it, is upside down, and a little bit forward of where it should be. The vessel came down in one piece. There's also taconite on the underside of it, which leads people to believe that it sank more slowly than the bow, which went down anvil, and it flipped the rotation of the propeller, probably flipped it, and it landed later. In fact, taconite cargo was still in the water column, and was able to settle underside of the upturned stern. And you see the home port there. And another takeaway here is you see that there's not a single zebra or quadra mussel. The Fitz hasn't been on the bottom that long, but it's very clean, other than silt. And you'll see that to this day. We found the Western Reserve this summer in Lake Superior. That boat went down in 1892, I think, and hull paint totally visible. Ship, running lights are clean, beautiful, clean grass. It's encouraging, and then it's sad to look at some of the wrecks that I grew up down here. They're just a gray blob of garbage. This is a good vision. This is another one. Photos that kind of got under my skin. That's the RDF antenna, the direction finder. If you go to the Valley Camp some summer, you'll see they have one on the Valley Camp down in the cargo hold. It's like a big pipe. It's like a pipe railing. The hydrodynamic force of the plow diving bent the thing like wind, like a hurricane wind, just bent the RDF back in the direction of the plunge. It's just haunting to imagine. Here we are, July 4th, 1995. After getting the blessing of the surviving family members, Canadian government, in 94, 95, it was determined, lawsuits, which terrible ugliness, that the vessel, the wreck, is actually in Canada. It's not in the States. Canada has much more strict archaeological laws, the context of shipwreck access. So families sued after the bell was recovered as a memorial. They petitioned the Canadian government to close the site to further exploration, which has been honored ever since. So this was really the last time down this wreck. And if you notice in the your right side, that is Buck Champeau's brother. And you've seen a lot of times, if you watch, I watch a lot of documentaries, and a lot of moments are they're sort of created. Their drama is created sort of artificially. This was a moment. The bell came up, and his brother had been shipped off to Vietnam in the late '60s, and about Champeau's brother actually, Jack. So yeah, so evidently Buck told Jack, and he happens to you over there, I will come and I will get you and I will bring you home. And so the bell came up, and Jack was just talking to the baby very much in his own mind, and basically talking to the bell, saying, "This is the best I could do. I came for you, and this is the best we could do for you." And it's just spine tingling. It's very moving, very real, unlike a lot of stuff you see. The bell was replaced by a commemorative bell over there. And then Gordon Lightfoot was, for many years thereafter, involved in a very quiet way. If you get a chance, in the exhibit, there's a letter written by Gordon Lightfoot to your mother, to you. It's a classic letter. Yeah, it's just really, he's a very class act. And he was very concerned and didn't want to be viewed as having exploited the situation for his own gain. And so he would come very often as a member. In fact, when I did the book, he came to Whitefish Point and just quietly sat with it. There's no fanfare. There's no announcement of his being there. Didn't play, just would sit and talk. I can't say enough. We ring the bell once a year. Very large event, large enough that we've had to kind of turn it into a virtual event. beyond family members, technical people, and museum staff. Can't really. The gallery is quite small, so large number join us for the simulcast. Since 2020. This was a sonar picture taken in 2003 that shows high definition. Sonar was sort of new. Shows the location of the bow and stern sections. You can see the mountains of taconites strewn around broken halves. So this was the 30th anniversary of the sinking in 2005. Some taconite pellets were brought up intentionally or unintentionally in skids for the submersibles that was exploring the shipwreck. And so a maritime group in Detroit did a sort of ceremonial delivery of some of the cargo, some of the Fitzgerald's cargo aboard the mail boat. They delivered pellets to Zug Island. So commemorate that 30th anniversary. So here's the Anderson in her glory. This is what she would have looked like in 1975. She's since been converted, lengthened, and converted to a self-promoter, so she doesn't look quite like this anymore. So in 2015, the word on the street was that the Anderson was not going to sail again. So I jumped on in January of 2015. I thought, well, let's show people what it seemed to me that while the Fitzgerald is a tremendous tragedy with a lot of light on it, the reality is quite different. Great Lakes ships move a staggering amount of cargo very safely with very little heartburn. And the Anderson is a great example of that. Having come through that storm, she's been trading successfully 9 months a year for 50 years now after the sinking Fitzgerald. So in 2015, 40 years on, I thought, well, I'll go for a ride and see what life on the Anderson is like 40 years later. We are crossing Lake Superior. Down, it's very cold. Here we are passing Zug Island, which is where this was headed that night. Things went okay until now, and then we got into Lake Erie, where the ice was windrowed like 10 feet thick. We sat in the ice for 2 weeks. My wife was not, didn't have kids yet, thank God. So we sat, my friend was running out of his heart medication, the Coast Guard had to bring food out to us. It was quite a thing. There's nothing to take pictures of, really. Sitting in the ice. And then now we'll talk just a little bit about the new book, the new edition, 50th and commemorative edition. A lot of the material, as I hope would be the case, put the book out in the world, and then more stuff comes back in the museum, other stuff, people find stuff, send it along. It's a great image at the launch of some campfire girls, which I learned are sort of a competing tribe of Girl Scouts. These campfire girls were part of the crowd of like 15,000 people that turned up to see the launch. This is the chief engineer's dress officer's cap, which he had shipped home in August of 1975 for dry cleaning. The passenger season was over, so there was no reason to wear a dress uniform. So he shipped the uniform home, and it was with his relatives and survivors many years after. Still, a collector picked it up. This is George Holt's dress officer. This is a new photo we found. That's John Simmons was the wheels performer. Nice shot of Fitzgerald's pilot house. He's at the Iron Mike, which is the auto helm. This was 95 after the bell brought up. Gordon Lake was playing a concert in Detroit. So folks, Shipwreck Society and Richard to see the concert backstage. I met him 3 times. He was a class act. I wanted a photo. I have always like about 12 projects going at any given time, and I wanted to photograph him for a portrait project I'm working on. So a friend of mine knew his manager for many years, and he said, "Oh, I'll go to bat for this photo," which he did. And sure enough, he called me up and said, "All right, be in Duluth." This was in 2000. So I set this whole thing probably would have never worked anyways, but this whole thing up. And I waited. I got a hotel room, sitting there waiting. And pretty soon it was evident. It was like 4 o'clock. It's never gonna happen. The light's gonna be gone, and it's like, we're gonna go to the war dock and this whole thing. And they finally called. They said, "Oh, I'm sorry, the bus, was late, and our soundtrack was terrible. I feel awful. I'm so sorry about, and I'd like you to come to the concert tonight. Come backstage." So we did that, and there's my friend Kathy. And we just had a great time. It was so much fun. And that was right before I think he had the aneurysm in 2002. This was 2000. It's right. This might have been the last tour. If you're a fan, you realize that his voice was never the same after that aneurysm because they had to do tracheotomy in order to save his life. And he both looked sick thereafter, and he did not sound golden tenor. Was never the same after that aneurysm. This is 2013. You can see he always looked sick after that. He was always very thin, and his health was never quite the same after aneurysm. But he's, stays a road warrior to the end. He's touring right to the end. Of course, passed in 2023, which is another major marker here in the mythology of Fitzgerald. He now is gone as well. This is there are they're called cenotaphs, which is Greek for empty grave or tomb. So the families keep some of the families keep cenotaph at White's Point, and I think it's kind of an Irish thing. There are the idea of a cairn where people put a stone on the grave as a memorial to the lost, the loved and the lost. It's another great shot. This was the last year she was laid up for the winter. Her last 5 year was in the spring of 1974. So this is Lorain, Ohio. She was laid up in the dry dock. That was the last dry dock. April 74. The man and the myth. Another shot of it. You can see the painting, the Greek Columbia there behind folks there. That was the Olave Norton's Columbia Steamship Line's first vessel, which also sank in a shipwreck. This is another great shot. This is right after the launch. After they launched it without the upper works and stack. They put those on the floating dry dock, and they were towing her here, still in her red ledge, not painted yet. They're towing it over to fitting out berth at Great Lakes Engineering. Found the original of this shot. I had a postcard, first edition, which it has a line screen on it, so it didn't super well. This is the original photograph. It's a great shot. Toledo in 1965, with all the old cars and the big Hullet unloaders, which those are all gone now too. Amazing today. It's the only color shot I've ever seen in the engine. It's the turbine. And this is a wild. These fellows from Michigan, they have stand-up paddleboarded across all 5 Great Lakes, and for an act of raising money for Case of Lake Superior, they raised money for the museum, and so they were crossing Lake Superior in this freakish weather. It was flat, calm. So here they're over the Fitzgerald and placed a reef over the wreck. 17 miles offshore. It very rarely looks like this. So it was very eerie. So I got wind in November. I was ready to be done with the book, and I got wind in November of last year that the Anderson may be not long for the world. I won't bore you with all the market forces at work there, but this fellow who's placed very high in the Great Lakes Fleet said you should come along on the last trip because I don't know supposed to go in the dry dock over the winter. They've not made any arrangements, and I don't know, given all of the elements in the equation, I don't know if the boat will ever sail again. So how ironic, I guess, would that be if 50 years after the sinking of Fitz, if Anderson took her last trip, this is January 14th to 18th of this past winter, floating, and eerily enough, the trip was the exact same trip they were running in 1975. Two Harbors, Minnesota to Gary, Indiana. Loaded. Came across in bitterly cold weather. Fortunately, the ice hadn't formed up yet, so that we didn't get stuck, but it was very cold. And I used to, interestingly, it just occurred to me as I was making this up, those are the famous vent caps that Fitzgerald reported that Anderson has the same kind of vents. Those are the vent caps that were reported missing by Captain Sorley after 4 o'clock on the 10th. So it gives you some idea what they look like. In this case, they're frozen shut, so he's having to torch them open so they can open the vents when they go. There's the turbine engine, and the captain, who's quite a young guy. His father was retired as the chief engineer at Rogers City, over to Rogers City, Michigan. It's like a company town. Everybody that lives there works on the boats. In this case, 3 generations, and Tyler Thompson was the captain, the permanent captain on the Anderson last season. His dad retired as the chief engineer of the boat 3 or 4 seasons before that. Leaving Gary, freezing cold, headed for Toledo, Ohio, and long-term layup. This is a good. I feel like I'm out of time, so I can't get too far down this road. These 2 guys, yeah, I see you come. He's got the look. Here's this guy in the green hat. Yeah, guess with this guy in the green hat is first assistant engineer. Guess where he worked not long ago. And there's a whole other hole I will not rabbit hole I will not go down. He was an assistant engineer on the El Faro, which sank in 2015. The more recent analog to the Fitzgerald, the first major U.S. merchant marine loss since the Fitzgerald. 2015, sank in Hurricane Joaquin in the Caribbean Sea. Both the second and first engineers on this trip had both worked for Tote Maritime. Steam culture has shrunk down to just a handful of guys who know how to maintain these power plants. So the first assistant, second assistant, both been on the El Faro, and they had some interesting things to say, and they were not surprised that what happened happened. So I'll leave you with that. Here's the Anderson blowing your boilers down for the last time. I hope these photos might become very poignant. If they are the last photos, I hope they're not. I hope she comes back out. I'd much rather have a living piece of history than some dead photographs in my PowerPoints. So I'll leave it at that way. It's my boy Anderson. We named him after the boat. How weird is that? And the girls. And the saddest photo in the whole book is Bruce Hudson, and his name escapes me. These are the youngest deckhand. So they have their whole lives in front of them, so they think. And it reminds us how precious life is, how fragile. So I apologize if I rambled. These are my really. Anybody have any questions? So surely I must have covered everything by now.
Did you say the Andersons coming in here this winter?
They often will. In years past, they have laid up at base. It's not the last week.
Yes. Do you think it was possible for the Anderson to be closer to the Edmund Fitzgerald? People were surprised they didn't try to do that.
The Fitzgerald was faster than the Anderson, so there was just a natural. And then of course they did the Fitzgerald one. There was the storm put out their radar equipment. They slowed down, which was a clue to anyone who knew Captain McSorley. Never slowed down. Well, he slowed down, and he said, "Why don't you catch up with us?" Under those conditions, I would not expect them to go down much closer than they did. And one of the things that contributes to the mystery is their position keepings prior to modern age. We'd know exactly where the boat was at all times. We'd have a clear record. The El Faro had a voyage data recorder that they recovered, so they had 26 hours of everyone's conversation, all the data, all of the satellite information. They knew exactly what happened. Fitzgerald, all you have is a guy dead reckoning in the middle of a huge storm. They didn't know where the Anderson really was. They didn't know where Fitzgerald really was exactly. And none of this was carefully notated in the log. So any theory that you come up with is predicated on all kinds of assumptions. So to answer your question, no, I don't think it helped, or that they would have, if they had been closer, that they have changed the outcome. Right?
If anything, both ships may have gone down.
Right.
That was, if that were.
Yeah, it's our, again, in the Swiss cheese world, if they took the northern route, the weather got bad enough, some hours, 12 hours into the voyage, that they ran the North Shore route. They went up under the Canadian shore to get out of the weather, which, in hindsight, that when they came down then around Michigan Island, that shallow water, they came down right into the throat of that weather system. They have just maybe gone straight ahead, maybe it would have been bad, but they wouldn't have gone right into the worst part of the weather. They wouldn't have been in shallow water if you subscribe to the grounding theory. So a couple of things have gone differently. We would have had just another fairly routine stormy voyage. Any other questions? I'm losing my voice. I've kept these children up way past that. We still have to drive home in a while. Much longer than I. Thanks for joining us.
Does anybody out there have questions?
I asked. I was able to answer the one question. But no.
I should also say, your student book, the 50th anniversary book, it will be available through the Shipwreck Museum's online gift shop. Just go to shipwreckmuseum.com after the 15th of October, so prior to the 10th. All right. Maybe we have.
Thank you guys all for coming out. Join us next month when the topic is the Cobia submarine comes to town with Karen Duval, the Cobia curator. Have a great night. Safe travels. Watch your here, everybody. Thank you all for coming.
We'll see
Dan wasn't able to connect.
What?
He wasn't able to connect. Suppose so. What the guy said. So I have no idea. He's older than me. I should accept the fact.
Did he already take his cable?
I think so.
He did?
So it's not no.
Go away.
So the address. So that address over.
Stop.